Hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Washington, D.C. comic, science fiction, and fantasy fans' Fantastic Forum. I'm your host, Ulysses Campbell, and we are delighted to have you with us. I just want to introduce my panelists for today's show. We have Mr. Roberto Ortiz, Mr. Drew Bittner, and Mr. Brandon Keith Hallmark, who is joining us for the first time. Welcome. We are pleased to have you with us. Our topic for today's show is something that might be a bit of a departure from some of the other things that we've done. I know it's not always talked about, particularly in comics, but we want to explore gay, lesbian, and transgender portrayals in comics, science fiction, fantasy, and the related multimedia. A lot of comic fans that I have run up on are fairly expansive in terms of their views, but there's still a lot of very interesting ideas, a lot of fear also that frequently surrounds gay, lesbian, and transgender portrayals in people. And so we want to explore some of that, try and break that open, because under the skin we're all the same. And ultimately my personal feeling is that people are much too concerned with what color you are, or who you're sleeping with, when what you need to go to is the intellect of the person, the content of their character. So on that note, I throw it open to you gentlemen. Where do you think we are today in terms of portrayals of gay, lesbian, and transgender characters in comics and the related multimedia?
Well, it's interesting that in your introduction that you mentioned that a lot of comics readers are expansive in their views. And in truth, I think that the gay community really appreciates comics and science fiction. Superhero comics, I feel like in particular, offer a welcoming atmosphere to gays and lesbians, because you put on the underwear outside your tights and suddenly you're more powerful, you're more able to be the person that you want to be. And that's very appealing to especially younger gays and lesbians coming out who feel that they don't belong to the major groups, or really don't fit in quite as well with the vast majority of straight people and are trying to find their own way. It's welcoming to think, to fantasize about the idea that, hey, if I just put underwear outside my pants, I suddenly become stronger and I'm able to correct the ills of society. And so those themes are frequent throughout comics, and I think it's very noticeable to comic fans. The X-Men, for instance, are very allegorical for not only gays and lesbians, mutants being outcasts from society and whatnot, and fighting for their rights, but also for any minority group. So I think any comics reader, we pick up on those themes.
Well, what happens when you have heterosexual writers who, bless their hearts, really try to present characters who might be gays, lesbians, transgender, but they don't have the frame of reference to actually write those characters. It's kind of like when you see a horror movies in the 80s and you see the African-American character, and the first one to die is the African-American character, and the reason the African-American character dies first is because the writer, who's usually a white person, has no concept of what African-American is.
I understand where you're going with that, Roberto, but I think that if you're a writer and a good writer, you write people as people, and the characteristics become incidental. I mean, unless it's central to the plot for some reason, that a character happens to be African-American or a woman or American Indian or gay or lesbian, transgender, it's probably not that relevant. Because I also think that you have, for example, you have gay or lesbian writers who are writing straight characters.
Yes.
You can make the same comment that what frame of reference do they have? Well, everyone's been in relationships. Everyone's had, parents, well, almost everyone's had parents, So a lot of these things are issues that we all connect with in some way, whether it happens to be, a straight relationship, a gay relationship, is almost beside the point.
But Roberto does have a point, actually, and that is a lot of early gay characters were written by straight writers who wanted to portray a gay character but didn't maybe have the correct frame of reference, or used it for shock value like they did in the early 2000s, late 90s with X-Force. You had that monster of gay man like making out every other issue with the guy he was dating to kind of shock the readers. But even characters such as North Star, taking a character who really hadn't been portrayed as particularly sexually active.
Well, I would actually jump in there. I mean, if you look at North Star in Alpha Flight, John Byrne was laying the groundwork for that being who the character is, because you only see Jean-Paul Beaubier with other guys.
But don't you think that, and I did a couple of points I want to make, because it seemed to me that, because I was watching North Star from when they first introduced him in X-Men, and it seemed as if he started out one way and then later on somebody said, hey, let's make this guy gay, which sort of leads me to another point that I'd wanted to make that I thought of while you guys were discussing this. And I think this is part of the problem. It seems like today too often a lot of writers come at the whole issue from the standpoint of, oh, I want to write a gay character, as opposed to I want to do this character who just happens to be gay. And I think that's where a problem starts. I mean, you need to start out with a good character who happens to be gay, or who happens to be black, or who happens to be female, or something like that. And Shireen made that point on another episode where, she said, I want to see a really good, villain, villainous, but I mean, unfortunately, these people start out, as these stereotypes before they actually get to the meat of the character.
And that's actually the point I wanted to get to, was North Star started out, as when he came out, he became the gay. He became the token gay character. And even today, North Star is probably the when you think of gay characters in Marvel, and there are more than a few now, North Star is kind of the go-to because he was so early back in what, the late 80s, I believe, is when he came out. But when writers would take someone like North Star and make them gay, or introduce a gay character on their own, you would get stories like North Star gets an AIDS baby. Or at one point they were going to give North Star AIDS, and thank God, the editor stepped in and said, no, that's really not a good idea. And while, especially in the early 90s, late 80s, AIDS was a big story behind the gay community.
You don't want it defined by one issue.
It's only been recently that we've seen gays and lesbian characters portrayed as not the token gay, not mentioning that they're gay in every issue that it comes up. They're always fighting bigots, and that's what they do. That's the only thing they do. Now we've gotten more.
Hate to interrupt you because this is a great point, but we've come to the end of the first segment, and I want to make sure that we have some time because there's a fabulous piece that I went to a thing called Gaylaxicon, gay science fiction convention that was held up in Bethesda, and we've got some footage that we want to show you from that. But we're going to show you that, and we're going to be right back in just a moment. Don't go anywhere. Now, our viewers may not be very familiar with Galaxicon. Can you tell us a little bit about how the convention got started and what the overall goals were?
About 20 years ago, gay fandom looked around and said, why don't we have our own organized group? I lived on the West Coast at the time, and there was no organized gay fandom except for in the party suites. We'd throw gay parties, room parties. On the East Coast, they started organized gay fandom, in which we got together, we had specific goals in mind, we talked about science fiction and fantasy as it relates to the gay and lesbian, bisexual, transgendered community. And they started organizing, they brought it together. Local clubs organized, and then they worked together to form the network, and then the network helped to organize the Galaxicons, a convention specifically for GLBT fandom and their friends.
So now, how many years has this been going on?
This is the 20th year we've been running Galaxicon. The network itself is slightly less than 20 years old. organized gay fandom, as in the first gay clubs here on the East Coast, is slightly more than 20 years old. So soon after the organization, they started organizing. Soon after the first clubs, they started organizing.
Now, what sort of events do you have at Galaxicon?
We have discussion panels on a fabulous set of topics, and you can pick up a copy and you can see what we in fact include on it. We have readings by various authors. We have a dance. We had a movie night. We have an art show. We had a gaming room. We have a room party where people can just sit back and relax. Did I mention an art show already? We have an art show.
Well, this sounds like any other science fiction convention I've been to.
Pretty much it is. Pretty much it is, with one exception. And that is that we are subsets of two different groups. We are part of the gay community. We're a subset of that. We're the part that likes science fiction, fantasy, horror, and related genres. We're also the subset of fandom, in that we happen to be gay fandom. This allows us to develop our own community in which we don't have to worry about explaining ourselves, because we already know. We all know science fiction, fantasy, and horror, and we already know the gay part. You bring it together and you look for where it applies to us. And we're slightly different from the two major communities of which we're a part. Galaxicon allows us to be part of both of those communities at the same time.
I've never been to one of these things before. I've been to one other science fiction convention, and that was not the best. This was a lot better than, it was amazing. I've really enjoyed my time here.
Tell me a little bit about what you enjoyed about the convention.
I think meeting so many different kinds of people was the best part so far, but I really enjoyed the panels. I liked going to the panels and hearing what people had to say. There was a Galactic Jeopardy game. That was fun. And I really enjoyed, I liked the banquet and the dealer room. There were so many good things, and I learned how to play so many different new games.
Now, you've been to other conventions before, have you not?
Yes.
How did you find this convention different from previous conventions, or did you find it any different?
I found it a lot different.
What were some of the differences between Galaxicon and some of the other conventions that you attended?
I think a lot of people are just here having fun and relaxed, and just everybody's positive attitudes. And, everybody's just on the same wavelength, I guess. And I'm learning, you get to learn and chat and socialize and do so many fun things. And socialization is always fun.
They have an award for Best Short Story, Best Novel. And that's kind of encouraging for a writer like me, because that's recognizing the really good books. And they read about 50 novels, about 50 short stories to select the winners. They have a short list, there's a nice banquet. It's very encouraging for the writers, and it tells me what I'm going to be reading, because I went straight to the book room and bought the books that won.
Now, how have you found Galaxicon to differ from other conventions?
In many ways, it's very similar to other science fiction conventions. The format is very similar. You have paneling, you have pretty much everything else that other conventions have. I guess as a gay person, it feels more inclusive. I don't have to worry that there's a certain percentage of people that just won't approve of who I am because of that arbitrary aspect. So it feels more comfortable. I think the people it just feels more comfortable and welcoming.
But with things like Gaylaxicon and going into convention committees and saying, okay, what can you do for us? This is what we can offer you. Yeah, maybe, over time things will change.
How has the event grown over the years?
It started out 20 years ago with less than 60, 50 people, something like that in it, and now we're talking several hundred people at a convention. The actual membership of the network is probably 3 to 4 times that. The actual number of gay fandom, people who don't necessarily belong to the network, who may not belong to one of the local clubs, but who are self-identified gay fen, that's fandom for fans, who are gay fen, Lord, who knows how many tens of thousands of them are there. Our local club, Lambda Sci-Fi DC area Galaxians, runs a booth every year for the past 17 years for DC Pride Day. And invariably we have people who come up to the table and go, oh my God, You mean there are gay fans? You guys are like us. You're gay and you like science fiction and fantasy. This is so terrific. And they'd never heard of us. And we offer them that sense of community.
Why are events like this important?
It is that feeling of community. When the network and the organizations, the different local clubs were first formed about 20 years ago, we were answering the let's get together kind of thing, the feeling like, can we be a group? Are we a cohesive group? Can we find other people who like what we like so we can get together and have a good time? And can we do it outside of the bar culture?
Are you ready? Hello out there in TV land. It's Ulysses Campbell coming to you with yet another edition of the Fantastic Forum Mailbag. Today's letter comes from Donald Ward of Montgomery County, who's been watching on Access Montgomery. Thanks very much for watching, Donald. Your show is titled Comic, Science Fiction, and Fantasy Fans Fantastic Forum, but you seem to focus mainly on comics. Well, that's because we have a lot of people who are real, deep comics fans, but our interests are varied. We're also all into science fiction and fantasy, and since you have asked, we will make sure that we try and put some focus on doing some other things in the various upcoming episodes. We've got some interesting things planned. Just keep watching because me personally, one of my early loves was science fiction. Also got into the various fantasy books, Lord of the Rings, at a very young age. So, you know, we're all in this thing together and we all share the same loves. Just hang in there with us and you'll see what you're looking for. Thanks for watching and keep tuning in. And we are back to Fantastic Forum. We're talking about portrayals of gay, lesbian, and transgender characters in comics, science fiction, fantasy, and their related multimedia. And we're going to basically pick back up where we were when I had to interrupt Brandon. You were talking about North Star and how at one point the editors had wanted, the writer wanted to give him AIDS and the editor stepped in.
Right, and I was leading to the point that portrayals of gay and lesbian characters have really changed over the past only few years.
Yes.
And we're starting to see more rounded gay characters show up. North Star is probably not even a great example of that right now. I would lend you to more characters like the portrayal of Wiccan and Hulkling in Young Avengers, I think, was particularly well done. That was done by a gay writer, Alan Heinberg, who writes for Grey's Anatomy. Although, is that show even on anymore?
Yes, it's doing quite well.
Making more money outside of comics now.
But he did the OC and
yeah.
You know,
so he did a particularly good job, you know, sending subtle signals that these characters that were actually picked up upon, I think, before he meant them to be. That fans started going, hey, these two dudes, they're into each other, and it was. I remember one panel in particular where the characters in that comic are hanging out, and Hulkling, in his normal blonde kid form, just kind of has his arm around his boyfriend, and these kind of nice subtle reminders that hey, these are gay characters, but they're not predominantly gay. They don't think of themselves as gay first. They've got other problems. They're kids like any other kids, and we're seeing that more even in DC, which I think doesn't quite have the dearth of I guess iconic gay figures that are actually gay. But in like Manhunter, for instance,
right now they have Batwoman is
right.
a lesbian. She's the lead character in Detective right now. The backup character in Detective is The Question, Renee Montoya, who's also gay. Maggie Sawyer was brought out as a lesbian character
by John Byrne.
By John Byrne in Action many years ago. I would say
that
comic
Obsidian. You have Obsidian, who is
Gay.
frequently used in Manhunter now because he's dating Manhunter's co-worker, and he is Alan Scott's. So he's kind of he's one of those characters that may not have been, originally been intended to be gay, but it made sense for him to be so. And then it was revealed that Manhunter's son, kind of predictably, is going to grow up to be gay and have a boyfriend who grows in size, which Manhunter is actually written by another gay man. I can only think he must have laughed when he thought that up.
Gotcha.
But the thing is that what I like what's happening with comics is that there's a lot to be said in terms of the characters not necessarily identifying themselves as this sexual orientation, but seeing their point of view. Case in point, Batwoman. I like the point that they're doing in the book that it's presented as matter of fact. She's gay, no big deal. She dates, she has issues. She has a perfectly normal relationship with her father, who's a military guy, which is a very, very good example of how relationships between people who are gay and their parents are. For example, in the case of my family, my cousin happens to be gay, and we have a perfectly okay relationship with it. We are really, really accepting. No big deal. And I was very surprised to actually see that reflected in the comic book, where instead of becoming the issue of this character that defines the character, it's just part of who she is. And the father is okay with it.
Yeah.
That was cool.
Now, one thing we haven't started talking about, we've discussed some gay and lesbian issues, but we haven't talked about transgender, and there's actually there's a lot of characters over the years that have been transgender characters. Some of them deliberately so, some of them ended up that way. But just running down the list, I can think of, let's see, Cloud in Defenders, Loki, who's currently in Marvel continuity, a male god who's been reincarnated as a female. Sasquatch was temporarily a woman. Walter Lankowski wound up in a female body temporarily.
I remember that.
Some issues with Mystique
I'm impressed.
as well.
Mystique.
The X-Men have touched upon gay and lesbian and transgender themes, I think, more than any other, comics line out there.
They've been real cutting edge. Although there's the Authority, because you got
the Midnighter.
And Apollo.
Yeah.
That's
Apollo Midnighter's a very upfront.
But to be fair, and I was thinking about that the other day, that originally was introduced for the Chuck value. The whole concept, hey, we have this representation
we have
of
a Batman
Superman
analog and Superman,
and they're kissing
analog,
each other. Ooh, it's like, come on.
And actually, one of the things going back to the Hulkling-Wiccan relationship, about the subtlety of that relationship, they've never had an on-screen kiss. We've yet to see that in a Young Avengers comic, and it's just interesting that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these things are not. You don't have to hammer home.
Yeah.
A lot of these things. It's just but I actually think the comics is kind of a lagging indicator. I think the comics was behind the times in terms of introducing characters.
Hell, minority characters, for example, they're still lagging behind a lot.
Yeah.
Well, totally. I mean, but I think that's still a holdover from the Dr. Frederick Werdum seduction of the innocent thing, back in the 50s. I mean, there was, terrible scandal basically associated with that. And, even, I mean, the implication that Batman and Robin.
The idea that
gay,
comics have to be wholesome entertainment is kind of like.
Well, not only gay, but that there was pedophilia going on.
Yeah.
Well, yes.
Well, I mean, but that whole wholesome entertainment thing, that trope was really worn out by the 70s. You would have thought that as progressive as Marvel and sometimes DC have been, there would have been much more of a push to have more diversity, more inclusiveness. But,
well, there were characters like Luke Cage were designed to be kind of those characters, Black Panther and whatnot.
But unfortunately, a lot of them get introduced as stereotypes or whatever, and
true. Luke Cage actually almost got named Isaiah Washington before, again, a very intelligent editor said, no, that's not a good idea.
I want to expand on one thing before we go on. Look, for example, on the concept of Blue Beetle. The current kid who's playing Blue Beetle is one of the most rounded Hispanic characters I've ever seen in my life in a comic book. And it took a long time before we actually saw a character like that. So I imagine how the gay community must feel in terms of seeing a character like that too, that is well-rounded.
And there is no character right now, and it's a little sad. There is no character that's out there that's really, like I said, the gay icon, I guess, that you can think of is North Star, but he hasn't been well-rounded enough, and I think that's to Marvel's detriment. I really think with you have a character that is an Olympic level athlete. He is a successful businessman. He's an interesting, snarky character with a power set. He's super fast, super strong. He's a trained ninja, and yet they haven't. He could be Marvel's Superman, and they haven't tried to take him there. And I think with the audience out there, the gay and lesbian readers would really be supportive of North Star. And then if you took him and made him well-rounded, so he wasn't just searching out and finding bigots to punch every week, that if you gave him an interesting story to follow, that you really could set up a character like Blue Beetle is for the Hispanic community.
On that note, we're out of time. Thank you very much for having been with us for this very scintillating conversation. We hope to bring you some more of this in future episodes. In the meantime, thanks for watching. We look forward to entertaining you in the future.